All right. Yeah, I want to look at Jeremiah 22. This is kind of an example of classic prophetic material where the prophets champion the cause of the marginalized and the weak, of the disenfranchised. So I'll take it in a couple sections and notice what he's saying. So Jeremiah 22, starting in verse 1. Thus says the Lord, go down to the house of the king of Judah, and there speak this word, and say, hear the word of the Lord, O king of Judah, who sits on David's throne, you and your servants and your people who enter these gates. Thus says the Lord, do justice and righteousness, and deliver the one who has been robbed from the power of his oppressor. Also do not mistreat or do violence to the stranger, the orphan, or the widow. And do not shed innocent blood in this place. For if you men will indeed perform this thing, then kings will enter the gates of this house, sitting in David's place on his throne, riding in chariots and on horses, even the king himself and his servants and his people. But if you do not obey these words, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that this house will become a desolation. For thus says the Lord concerning the house of the king of Judah, you are like Gilead to me, like the summit of Lebanon. Yet most assuredly I will make you like a wilderness, like cities which are not inhabited. For I will set apart destroyers against you, each with his weapons, and they will cut down your choicest cedars and throw them in the fire. Many nations will pass by this city, and they will say to one another, why has the Lord done thus to this great city? Then they will answer, because they forsook the covenant of the Lord their God and bowed down to other gods and served them. All right. So yeah, this is kind of classic, the call of the prophets, whether you're looking at Amos or you're looking at Isaiah. I mean, they all have a constant message, is that God is concerned for the weak people in society. And they have a special place in God's heart. In other words, he sees their predicament. And he wants those with power, those who rule, to give a special concern to the marginalized, to the weak. So that's the kind of the classic message. Often it is reinforced by the observation, for you too were slaves in Egypt. You were foreigners. So it's a little bit like, hey, weren't all of you in that circumstance at one time, and in your suffering you cried out to me, and I delivered you? Now why would you turn around and not heed the cries of those who are where you were, right? That's the logic, that God has made himself a God of slaves, of persecuted people, of those who suffer. So that's kind of the message generally. Anything else that you notice or catches your attention?
There is it goes around, comes around sort of message in this one, right?
Yep.
Your fellows will.
Yeah. Yeah, there's it's the principle of lex talionis, which is a kind of a payback in kind. And it's often talked about that way in the Hebrew Scriptures. Like if you do such and such, well, eventually such and such is going to happen to you. What you do is going to come back on you. And again, it's couched in terms of a warning, like, don't be foolish. Don't you realize that what you do will at some point be turned around and done to you? So there's that kind of logic is often there.
Sometimes it feels like the old way of thinking. Sorry. The first reaction was, if you do this, God will smite you in these ways.
Right.
But seeing it now as that's just the way of the world, that's what happens if you do that, because it's the way of the world.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's the way life goes. That there are consequences, and you can't continue immune to the effects of what you're doing. It comes back on you. The way that I would say, because like we looked at last time, the passage about God's vengeance, and at least the way I read that, when God's involved, it's for our healing. It's always. That he can use the fact that it comes back on us, and then we go, oh, I'm in misery, and God can say, now I can nurture you, I can heal you. So it's not so much like God inflicting it out of spite, like, God's saying, now I want to do it. It's corrective, it's disciplinary, in as much as God's involved in it. But at the same time, sometimes it simply is, like you said, what happens as a consequence just because the way the world is. But it can be read both ways. Now, certainly in these times, everyone conceived of everything that happened as being directly from the hand of God. They perceived it that way. Jesus questions that. So an example would be like in the Gospel of John, the man born blind, the disciples asked, who sinned, this man or his parents? Because for them, this is directly the action of God. His blindness is God's work. So how do you explain it? And Jesus goes, well, actually, no, neither this man nor his parents. Like, this is not a case where you see something, and that's the situation in the world, and God has made it that way. He says no. In fact, he says this is an opportunity for you to see the glory of God, like how God responds to our situations, not that the situation was inflicted by. So I think Jesus undoes that logic, that every single thing that happens must be how God wants it, which makes it very hard to believe in God, because then all the horrors and tragedies of this world and wars are somehow all the will of God. I would not defend that position. I would rather say, no, those are the works of humanity. And despite them, God works to heal us from all of our fighting and the things we do.
I think there's another side to that too, is, the green light that you got. Was it by chance, or did God turn it green? And so there's those aspects too, and yet as a believer, you don't want to discount a blessing as a blessing, but at the same
Or
time.
finding that parking space.
Yeah,
Or,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
But at the same time, you don't want to, almost trivializes it, and a non-believer or someone just kind of looks, and it does more, at times harm than it does, I think, the good that we think.
Yeah.
And attributing everything like that.
Yeah.
in addition to that, if you kind of go in that direction, that everything is under God, that it's God's active involvement in all of this, then you also tend to think of God as this vending machine. So,
Or as a puppet master,
Yeah.
controlling all the events. Yeah, so there's a mystery involved here, and you've expressed it very well, that God is definitely moving and at work, but also God is ultimately at work in kind of the way things are set up. Though none of it's intended for our harm, the way things are set up, sometimes we experience things that are harmful. So, I'm in agreement. I don't want to say, well, even good things are not of God. So it becomes difficult to say with great certainty, oh, this good thing was of God, or this evil thing was of God. You want to kind of reserve judgment a little bit. But that doesn't mean that God isn't at work. And so we should, as James says, we should give thanks because all good things come down from the Father of lights, is James' way of putting it. All good things come down from the Father of lights. So there is a way, which does frustrate some people, is I attribute every good to God and not the bad. And they're saying, well, you're just letting God off the hook. You're saying all the good is due to him, but he's not responsible, culpable for the bad that happens. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm saying if it's genuinely good, it's of God. But if it is truly evil, it is not of God. So I've had some people be frustrated with my defense of God's goodness. But yeah, if good things are happening, I want to be thankful. I'd rather err on the side of being thankful and attributing them to God.
I don't want to open too much of this box, but when you think of, when there's a hurricane coming and you're praying, Lord would, let it pass, and so it passes us and hits that other town over there and wipes them out.
Yeah.
And you say, well,
Or your football team.
yeah,
Or,
so it is, it's an easy concept.
No, it's fraught with pitfalls, but on the other hand, but at the same time, God is infusing the world with his goodness and with love, and we want to acknowledge that and see that as genuinely the work of God. And be humble where we're like, I can't say for certain about each and everything. Yeah. Derek?
I think just, because I don't think it's intellectually dishonest, but I guess like it smells that way. Because just to recognize that there are paradoxes like that all over, and it's a matter of scale. And like the one I was thinking of is like biology. We ultimately we're made of little atoms, but are the atoms me? No. Or I guess they're not, because they're constantly, I'm shedding them and breathing them out, and they're coming new ones in, and my whole substance turns over every, so often, and yet I exist, and I believe that's true, right? But that type of paradox, it's almost like a matter of scale, and you could see this, I think, in that as an analogy to that, where God is the life bringing the good, and there are patterns that he brings that are good, and yes, there is also some amount of like chaos or random ill fortune that is part of how that works, and that I wouldn't say is from him by definition, but it isn't intellectually dishonest. It's not unique to this argument. I don't think it's unique to Christianity to have a phenomenon we're trying to describe that is paradoxical in that way.
The way I've dealt with this is that I believe God's ways are above many of God's ways are above our understanding. And that I just don't understand, so I just have to trust.
Yeah.
And to be able to say that, I don't understand it, I don't get it, this doesn't make sense to me either. That kind of thing, I think puts us on a much more genuine place than denying it all.
Right. Or seeking full understanding, which is full there.
Yeah.
Greg, I was thinking of the scripture again, when you asked about it. One of the things that comes out to me is that, the admonition is to do no wrong, do no violence to the foreigner, to the fatherless, to the widow, don't shed innocent blood. But the part that I think we often miss is rescue from the hand of the oppressor, the one who's being robbed. That when we see somebody being hurt, it's our obligation to say something, to do whatever we can to make it right. And I don't think we emphasize that part enough. And I'm not advocating vigilantism or anything like that.
That would somehow be a contradiction of the very principle, but
But to say something.
Yeah.
When somebody is being hurt and being
to
wronged.
to take up their cause in an appropriate way. Right. No, and the thing is, he is talking to.
He's talking to a king, though. This isn't the context of a king.
Right.
Jeremiah is supposed to go tell the king.
Right. And the king and all of his court and his. So that's exactly where I was going. It's like we have to do a little bit of transposition, right? Translating, because this is spoken to a king who has that kind of power, and how these things will transpire are very much under his domain. This is on him and his court, right? But we don't want to read it simply about, well, it's about those people and their responsibility. We have to ask the question, so how does this translate to me and my responsibility? I have not the kind of power to make grand pronouncements about society, but to the point, I've got to ask the question, what can I do to take up the cause of someone who's suffering? What can I do to help those who don't have power and therefore get victimized? Although I'm not, sitting in state government or something where I actually have some of that. So it's easy to put it off and make it a political discussion, and that's not going to be profitable because I don't think any of us are in any of those positions. But to personalize it and say, but this is at the heart of how we respond to the heart of God. And so now I've got to figure out, well, what can I do in my daily activities, in my interactions, to be about the same agenda? Taking up the cause when we see oppression, saying that ought not to happen, and somehow defending the person who is being taken advantage of. What does that look like? And there's probably 1,000 things that can be adequate responses. Again, we can't do everything, but the question is, what are we doing, right? Finding ways to do something that we can do, and therefore respond to it. I think there's an interesting thing at the end of the passage, verse 9, that as far as I've read so far, the reason this has happened is they forsook the covenant of the Lord their God and bowed down to other gods and served them.
So that's a collective, that's the idea that it's not just the king, it's the,
Yeah.
how have we.
Yeah. So, and the implication is the covenant had everything to do with how you treated the marginalized. It's not like we've left that subject and now we're talking about crass idolatry. I think idolatry is worshiping things other than the God who cares for the widows, the orphans, and the vulnerable, and the stranger, which is the foreigner, right? So it's like this has happened because they left the covenant agreement they had with God and they went after other gods. Well, therefore, we can take that and say, so what is our priority? Is our God, our priority, upholding the needs of people, of my neighbor, or do I have a different God? And so, so it's like they left the covenant, but the implication of the covenant was to be fulfilled in how they treated one another, and particularly those most vulnerable. So that's an interesting little way in which Jeremiah is saying that's the heart and soul of the covenant, which shouldn't surprise us because Jesus says the law is summed up in love God and love your neighbor. So they left the covenant. Why? Because they're not loving their neighbor. And in particular, look at the neighbor who's most vulnerable. That's the heart of the covenant. And idolatry is to value something else other than love God and love your neighbor, right? But I like the point. That's also that brings the whole, this is all of Israel is involved in this covenant. So an individual Israelite would have to say, but I'm a part of that covenant, and I might not be the king, and I can't determine how everything happens in all of Judea, but what am I doing with the person who lives next to me, right? Where can I enact this covenant?
Things have changed in 3,000, 4,000 years.
No.
There's a TV show, I don't watch it because now I think it's so contrived, but initially the concept was great. It was What Would You Do or whatever, I think that's on ABC, John. Am I saying that right? And, it's a situation where somebody's abusing somebody in a diner, and it's, they try to see the reaction of somebody going to step in, type thing. But I was just going to give an example. This was not pat self on back because I still think my house may be egged because I did it. But we had a kid who's riding an e-bike without a helmet on. And for 3 or 4 months, when the ladies go to Bunko on a Tuesday night, the guys started getting together, the husband, going and having dinner together. And So everybody was complaining for 4 or 5 months about this kid because he's riding in the middle of the street, he's not wearing a helmet, and I saw him one time with his younger brother in the middle of the bike, neither one of them, and they're wobbling as they go down the road. And I've never had an opportunity to stop, but I finally did because he was stopped at a place where I could pull over, and I just rolled down the road and I said, hey, how you doing today? I said, is that e-bike fun? He said, yeah, it's great. And I said, I had a bike and my brother rode on the bike with me and he put his feet into the spokes and spun over. We crashed. We didn't have helmets on like we're supposed to have on bikes today. And so, what a miracle we didn't get, and I said, I really get worried when you're driving down the street that you're gonna fall and I might run over you. And I said, so just look at it as, I'm not this old man, I am an old man, but I'm not going, get off my grass. I'm telling you a story about, where I did the same thing you did and almost cracked up and everything. And so anyway, we were talking about the kid, and I said, I haven't seen this just last Tuesday, I hadn't seen the kid, and I said, I think I made an impact. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I told them the story that I almost did the same thing. But I thought his parents are gonna drive down to my house and say, don't talk to my kid. And then I sat there and thought, while I'm talking about it, is the respect, and I said, well, here's how I knew it maybe worked, was he was respectful, he said, yes, sir, and, listened.
Did he thank you?
Not one bit. Thanks for telling me to be cautious, you old geezer. But I'm just thinking about that. I think the issue was no different in Jesus' time or in Jeremiah's time. It's like, am I going to get involved? And I always think of, the woman that was about to be stoned, and Jesus stood up and, diffused that situation. And so, how can we do that and end up not being stoned? Because I think if I did it today, about somebody, they go, yeah, get the guy too, type thing. So I think it's a dilemma that we're probably never gonna get over.
It's going to take a lot of wisdom to figure out how to be helpful, how to take it's not always simple. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's more straightforward. Sometimes you really got to think about it and say, I feel an urging to do something, and think twice, what should I do? How can I be of a help?
The fact that you said that, I'll just do the amen part of this. The guy said, I'm going to call the cops, or I have called the cops. Now, how effective is that? Did you call the cops on a 14-year-old who's riding his bike just thinking he's having a good time?
Yeah.
But I haven't seen him. I haven't seen whether he's got a helmet on. I may be totally disappointed in my approach because he may be riding shortly with no helmet on and his little brother in between.
He's going down another street. He's going down another street.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am running into that guy again.
He's got to come down the main parkway, kind of thing. So I haven't seen him, but
Yeah.
But somebody said they had called the cops, and so I
Yeah.
just in the last few days heard that the cops had paid the parents a visit too, and I thought, great, he's gonna say it's kind of like this. But then, let's go trench his truck. And trench means, for people that don't know, means take your truck and make it fast. All right, great, sorry, but I just thought that might shed some light on Jeremiah's folks not wanting to get involved.
Well, let me follow a little bit more, just starting in 13. I'm not reading the whole section, but there's I think, a very powerful statement here, starting in verse 13. He's following with the same vein. Like I said, this is very much a prophetic theme through most of the prophets who speak to this. Verse 13, woe to him who builds his house without righteousness and his upper rooms without justice, who uses his neighbor's services without pay and does not give him his wages, who says, I will build myself a roomy house with spacious upper rooms and cut out its windows, paneling it with cedar and painting it bright red. I guess they liked red houses. Do you become a king because you are competing in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? Then it was well with him. He pled the cause of the afflicted and needy. Then it was well. Is not that what it means to know me, declares the Lord. So he's speaking to the current king who's the son of Josiah, and Josiah was the last righteous Jewish king, the one who became a king as a boy. And then when he grew to be a responsible age and actually kind of, started to serve as king, there was a reformation of Judaism under Josiah, a returning to the law, a rooting out of idolatry. And so he's talking to the son who's now king, saying, you're not following in your father's footsteps. And does building a nice palace make you king? I mean, I love that question. It's like, so you build does that make you king? Does that make you a king because you built a nice house, right? But then the most powerful statement is that in 16. About the father, he says, about Josiah, he pled the cause of the afflicted and needy. Then it was well. Is not that what it means to know me? So Jeremiah is saying to know God is to take up the cause of the needy. That's what it means to know God. And if that's not what you're doing, how do you say you know God? I mean, you don't get more pointed than that. If you're neglecting the cause of the needy and the afflicted, you can't claim to know God.
Greg, there's someone that, I've had many discussions with family and others about our lives are full of privileges that we did not earn. I'm large, male, I have that privilege. I am white, I have that privilege. So the question becomes, what do you do with those privileges? And I'm trying to remember where I got this, but someone says your thing you should do is use those privileges for those who don't have them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like taking up your college pay. So what do you do?
Like 2 or 3 inches of your height.
Yeah, it's what that's maybe another way to put it is what power do I have? Because we all have a certain degree of power, influence in certain circumstances. How can I use that to benefit those who lack it? But I like the point that Jeremiah says that's the heart of what it means to know God. To do that is to know God, which means to not do that is to not know God. It's just, it doesn't get any simpler than that, right? So then I have to ask myself, how well do I really know God? Because how concerned am I for the needy and the afflicted? If that's absent, I may be very, quote unquote, religious in a lot of my things I do, but I'm not really knowing God. I'm just participating in organized religion, right? And I really don't know God because he's the God of the fatherless, the God of the widow, the God of the orphan, the God of, the God of the foreigner, the needy person, the afflicted, which is what we saw in today's passage. Jesus' deep concern for this notoriously sinful woman. That's where God most resonates and directs his activity to those who are suffering and needy. So anyway, I think that's a very pointed prophetic sort of statement. Boils it down. Any other thoughts? What about how we see Jeremiah reflected in Jesus? How do we see these? Because you remember the comparison's made when Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that I am? One of the suggestions is Jeremiah. Why did people think, hey, this guy has a close resemblance to Jeremiah? Like he seems to be cut from that same cloth. So what are some of the I mean, what are the things we think about from the Gospels that really reflect what we're seeing here? What are some of the stories that reflect Jeremiah 22?
I think it's the Sermon on the Mount, sort of the world turned upside down. Who has power, who has authority, and how do they use it? It's to be brought low, to help the meek. You know, I think that's.
Yeah, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the meek. Yeah, you're right. That the Sermon on the Mount is completely filled with the concern for those who struggle, and he's pronouncing that as blessed, and in his specific recommendations, what he's saying, these are the ethics. He's saying we ought to respond to that.
I think the boldness that he proclaims this.
Yeah, he's as forthright about it as Jeremiah's be. Like with his parable of the Good Samaritan. I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan is this Jeremiah 22, right? You know, who's the person in need? Isn't it the guy laying in the ditch, which the Levite and the priest passed by? And you know, so. And the Samaritan, who's the foreigner, actually attends to a Jewish person. And of course, his point is, Samaritan seems to know God better than you Jews do. The Levite and priest don't seem to know God. So something like the parable of the Good Samaritan, very much this sentiment, right?
I don't think we know how explosive that parable was.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think we, I mean, I can't even think of what to compare it to today, of somebody saying that to who he said it to. And anyway.
Oh yeah, if you were going to do it that way today, it's the atheist who stops and helps the guy in the ditch, and not the preacher and not the priest. You know, I mean, depending on your audience, you pick the most unlikely person,
Yeah.
and says, well, that's the person who's really kind-hearted and does the will of God. Yeah, you pick some, and depending on your audience, who that might be. But you're right. When he said the Samaritan is the one who did this, yeah, that's offensive to Jews who look down on Samaritans on several levels, right? To suggest the ones they look down on are actually perhaps
The
more
hero
in
of the
touch.
story, yeah.
Yeah, the hero of the story, the one who's doing what it is at the heart of God. So yeah, that's a deeply provocative story.
I think I remember, I'm not quite sure where it came from. There was, the story goes something like this, that a group of young theologians was given the task of presenting a message on taking care of the needy, and they had to walk across campus to go deliver this message. And along the way, they had people that were needy, and of course these guys are moving across campus, ignoring all these people who are needy.
Yeah, it was a social experiment. Yeah, I remember John Harris.
I remember
about
talking about it, it's been too
Yeah,
long ago.
it was a social experiment where seminary students were told to prepare this lesson on caring for the needy, and then it had been set up intentionally that they would pass needy people, and it just showed how easily they could be all about the academics of the story and preparing their lesson, and actually not doing it on their way to deliver it.
Maybe it's John Harrison.
Yeah, he told that story, and like I said, it's a social experiment. I don't have the documentation for it, but it illustrates how easy an idea can be in our head that we don't implement at all, and how much study can not lead to actually change behavior. And I'm sure that then the seminary students were shown the problem so that they would realize, if we're not practicing this, all of our teaching and study that we're planning on doing for the church is going to be useless. We've got to do it first.
Then you've got a group like the Franciscans who don't just preach about the poor,
Yeah.
they become poor.
Yeah. Yeah. Which the idea of solidarity and identifying with the lowly, it is a Christian ideal. It is finding common cause with those in those circumstances. It doesn't mean you can, I mean, we face this dilemma in Tanzania, and we were told, look, you can't live on the level they live. I mean, it's just not even practical, and they don't even want you to, right? They're not asking you to live on the level they live. But we were told you need to identify, and the model was the incarnation. Jesus took, Jesus is the Son who took on flesh and dwelt among us. So we were encouraged, okay, so you're gonna eat their food, and you're gonna sit in their houses, and you're going to be with them, and appreciate what they have to offer, right? Because sometimes foreigners, Westerners, expatriates don't do that. They won't eat their food, and they won't identify with them, right? But it would have been impractical. I mean, I had to have a car. I couldn't get out to their villages. If I just rode a bicycle like they did, it'd be I couldn't get to it. Plus, they wanted me to use my car to help transport them. Right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't I could actually, live in a mud hut with them in their village. I couldn't actually do the work I was there to do. But the point about could I have solidarity with them, and identify with them and share with them. So again, it's a tricky thing, but it's the right direction to be headed, to ask ourselves the question, how can I identify with these people, whoever it is, who are suffering? What can I do, right? Yeah.
So, since I live downtown, I run across homeless people sometimes. And of course, everybody that's panhandling is not homeless. Some of those folks, it's a line in their budget, panhandling, but other people are clearly homeless. And, last Sunday when we were at the firehouse, I asked them to, cause they just want $1 to get something. Okay. And first of all, I don't carry dollars. I don't carry any money. I'm not gonna give them a charge card. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna take them home with me because a lot of people are so desperate, they might cause you harm. That could happen. So it's not smart for me to take them to the 19th floor. So what can I do? Well, I asked them at the firehouse the other day if I referred people down there for breakfast or lunch or dinner, would they let them eat? And we've been going to the firehouse all these years, and they said, yes, we will let them eat. If you refer them down here, we will let them eat. So that was good to hear for the men. But the other night, John and I walked back and forth to the theater, because we go to Red Mountain Theater, and it's a 20-minute walk for two slow people. And so we ran across this lady. She's sitting on a bench. She's got her suitcase there, and she's looking so forlorn. And I'm thinking, and this is 10:30 at night, because we've gone to a night performance. I'm thinking, man, I would love to know how to help her. So I'm just trying to think, I need to go to a women's shelter, and they have people on the desk 24 hours a day at some shelters. I'm thinking, I need to check with Pathways or First Light and see if a person came to the door at 11 o'clock at night, would they let them in to spend the night? I need to check on that, because personally, I need to know what my resources are, so I can refer folks without getting them walking 5 blocks and then getting turned away. This is really making me think how I can help like that.
Yeah, no.
I've taken a pan of biscuits down to the corner before, where 3 or 4 people gather at 7 o'clock in the morning and hand out biscuits, and I'm telling you, now, I'm those people's best friend. They're hoping I'll bring some biscuits back. And I might not, but anyway, this is really convicting me that I need to explore what the resources are for folks that I run across down there. One lady, I had $1. Sometimes I keep dollars in my console, and she's standing out there when I'm getting off the interstate. And I said, "What do you need? Do you need food? Do you need money?" She said, "Or do you need a place to stay?" And she said, "I'm trying to pay my electric bill so I can keep my power on." I said, "I can contribute $1 to help you keep on your electric bill. This seems like a reasonable cause." And I'm conducting all this business in about 12 seconds while I'm sitting there, trying to get off the interstate. but it's, sometimes it's not straightforward.
No.
And like I said, I have a lot of people that I could help, but sometimes it's not straightforward what you should do. So I'm just, like I said, I'm really convicted that I need to explore my resources.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes the way to help is to help through an organization where,
Right, exactly.
where people have worked out some of those logistics for you.
Yeah.
And you can then help, like we do by
Right.
serving a meal at the firehouse. They're doing things on a level. They've got 3 tiers of ways people can participate, go from homelessness all the way to a job and an apartment. So they've worked out all the details. They need volunteers like us to go lend a hand. So you're right. It's not just the the time when I'm faced with someone in need. That's one scenario, but there are many other cases where, yeah, there are organizations, well, like Cahaba Valley Healthcare. There are organizations that are already informed on how to do this. So I think you're right. Learning what our resources are, learning, like I have Hoover, it's a change from the past. The Hoover Police Department now has a woman who's an officer whose job is to deal with the homeless. I have her business card. I can call her up. We had a lady sitting out here for several days and sleeping. We're not running her off, but she came, the officer came, talked to the lady, got her into a shelter. I mean, they used to just run them out. I mean, 15 years ago, the Hoover cops showed up and basically threatened you, get out of Hoover. We don't care if you go to Vestavia or wherever, just get out of our town. Now they actually help. I think I'm so pleased about that. It's like now they don't see these people as someone to be run out, but someone in need, and there's an officer assigned to. That's her skill.
That's right.
So again, knowing the resources is, I don't always have to be the resource for everything. Sometimes I can just say, there's a resource, which I welcome when people call me up sometimes, and they'll say, Greg, I run into a person, what can I tell them? And I'll start rattling off at least what I know is, here's where I think you can find some resources to help. So I don't have to be personally the solution to everything, but I can be a part of a community of volunteers and people who work in this area and sharing it. So I don't have to do it all myself, but I can say, here's 2 or 3 options.
The story of the Good Samaritan, though, he took him to an inn.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he took him to an inn. He didn't take him home. Yeah, because one piece of advice is it's not wise to bring someone into your home. It's just not a good idea. It may be a good-hearted idea, but it may not. It's just not, and it's not really maybe what they need, right? There's places set up, and how can I be of assistance, right? Marcia, you had your hand up?
Well, another way I've done help is help to fund these organizations that know what they're doing. One of my jobs as a social worker at the cancer center is, patients who do not have transportation, getting them to their treatment. And, a company I work with is wonderful, but they're losing funding all the time. We can't do it because we lack funding. I get another source of funding, and so it's kind of like, if you know a good, like the Cahaba Valley Doctor, you know a good work that's going on, help them to do their job.
And I will tell you now, Cahaba Valley Healthcare has transportation for patients, because they are hooked up with, this just happened. They're hooked up with UAB social workers, and they will provide transportation for a patient to get to a dental appointment. So that's another
Wow.
thing for you to know, when you're referring folks. And these folks can call the organization themselves and do a self-referral. So that's a couple I'm really happy that my 3rd child, Cahaba Valley Healthcare, is growing up well. He's doing almost as good as my other 2 kids. So, anyway, that's a big development. It's really, you need to know that as a social worker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll stop there for today.